A wounded DEA officer was trapped in an abandoned cabin. Then his German shepherd made an impossible decision. The heat came first, low, steady, and rising. Not like the sun, not like summer. This heat had weight. It pressed against the trees and clung to the cabin walls, thick and pulsing, as if the very air had caught fire. DEA Special Agent Brent Delaney staggered forward through the busted door of the old mountain cabin, blood trailing behind his left boot. His leg was torn just below the knee, shrapnel from the roadside improvised explosive device rigged near the riverbed. He didn't know how far they had made it, only that he and Kilo had barely escaped with their lives. The dog followed closely behind, a German shepherd, bone-thin beneath a dirt-crusted coat, tongue hanging from exhaustion. His chest rose and fell rapidly, but his eyes never left Brent's face. Kilo was trained to detect narcotics, track fugitives, and survive enemy fire. But he was not trained for this, not for fire. Brent collapsed against the wall, gripping his thigh. The cabin was abandoned. Floorboards warped, dust layered thick on a rusted cot in the corner. A hunting knife lay forgotten on a table. One window was broken, the other boarded. The air inside was still, but even here the smell of burning pine leaked through the crack. The wildfire was getting closer, much closer. "Kilo!" Brent's voice was hoarse, dry from smoke and pain. "We're gonna need a miracle." The dog whimpered and nuzzled his face against Brent's arm. Brent closed his eyes for a second. 12 hours ago, they had been ambushed. The cartel's mules had spotted their undercover team and opened fire. In the confusion, Brent and Kilo had been separated from the convoy and forced off-road, deep into the hills. His leg was hit. His radio was dead. The last transmission he heard before the static took over was a single chilling word: wildfire. Brent blinked away sweat and blood. He tried to lift himself from the floor, but pain shot through his body like electricity. He fell back with a groan, barely able to breathe. Kilo paced near the door, then paused, listened. Then the wind shifted. Smoke, thick and angry, curled beneath the doorframe. The window glowed orange, then brighter, then the roar. Not wind, not traffic, but the unmistakable, terrifying roar of a wall of flame tearing through trees. Brent's heart seized. "Kilo," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Get out of here." But the dog didn't move. He looked back at Brent, eyes wide, steady, a silent refusal. Outside, the fire had reached the edge of the ridge. Branches popped like gunshots. Embers swirled through the night like glowing insects. The dry underbrush lit up in seconds. The cabin was about to be swallowed whole. Brent tried again, this time louder. "Kilo, go! That's an order!" Kilo took one step toward the door, stopped, turned, and came back. He lay down, pressing his body firmly over Brent's chest, shielding. Brent's hand reached up, weak and trembling, to touch the dog's back. "You stubborn idiot!" The fire crashed into the cabin's frame. The roof groaned. Wood cracked. Sparks flew inward as the edges of the room caught. The heat was unbearable. Brent's vision swam. But just before darkness took him, he saw Kilo still above him, teeth clenched, eyes locked on the door, as if he could will the fire to stay out. Then everything went black, and outside the inferno raged on, long before the fire, before the ambush, before the cabin in the woods. There was a cage. Brent Delaney still remembered the first time he saw Kilo. It wasn't in a sunlit field with eager trainers in uniform, nor was it at a polished government kennel filled with obedient recruits. It was underground, concrete, silent, the kind of place built not for life, but for testing it. The hallway reeked of bleach, rust, and something older, like forgotten metal and old pain. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds like they were trying to give up. Somewhere in the Arizona desert, beneath a privately run training facility contracted for canine tactical development, the DEA had been tipped off about illegal activity. Drugs, unlicensed biological enhancements, black-budget programs that never made it into official reports. When the agents raided the place, they found more than pills and syringes. They found kennels, 12 of them. Only 4 were occupied. Only 1 was quiet. The other dogs responded like broken machines, snarling, pacing in tight, endless circles, snapping at anything that moved. One had blood on its muzzle, another was missing part of its tail. One simply lay in its waist, unmoving, eyes open but seeing nothing. And then there was Kilo. He sat in the very last kennel, not pacing, not growling, not even trembling. He simply sat, motionless, expressionless, like a statue carved from bone and silence. Brent stopped in front of the cage. The name on the collar was partially rubbed off, but he could still make it out. Kilo. The paper clipped to the side read, Subject Kilo status, non-responsive to all known stimuli. Aggression level, minimal. Training compatibility, failed. Note, no fight, no fear. No functional use. Recommendation, discard. The technician at his side, clipboard in hand, glanced up with a shrug. That one's done. Doesn't eat, doesn't react, just shuts down. Honestly, better to put him down humanely. He's defective. Brent didn't answer. He stared through the bars, and for a moment Kilo's eyes flicked toward him, not sharp, not curious, just aware. I want the cage opened, Brent said. The tech hesitated. Sir, we don't recommend. I said open it. There was a pause, then a sigh, then a click. The cage door creaked open with the sound of rust grinding against time. Kilo didn't flinch. Brent crouched low, slow and steady, and extended his hand, palm up, fingers relaxed, offering nothing but presence. He said nothing. 5 seconds passed, then 10, and finally, without warning, without sound, Kilo leaned forward just a few inches and pressed the tip of his muzzle softly into Brent's waiting palm, not with affection, not with trust, but with permission. The room seemed to exhale, and in that moment something inside Brent shifted, like 2 fractured pieces finally recognizing each other in the dark. Over the next year, they rebuilt each other. Brent had seen his share of trauma, 2 deployments to Iraq, both leaving more than just physical scars. He had buried friends, held dying men in his arms, watched civilians suffer in ways he couldn't forget. When he returned, the battlefield followed him. It lived in door slams, in backfiring engines, in shadows that moved wrong. By the time he transferred into DEA Special Ops, he was functional, but far from whole. He didn't talk about it, no one asked, but Kilo, he never needed to. There was something about the dog's silence that calmed the storm. It wasn't comfort, not exactly. It was clarity. Brent didn't have to be anything around Kilo, didn't have to explain, pretend, or flinch. The dog's presence carved out space that even therapy couldn't reach. They trained together, worked side by side, raids, recon, surveillance, always quiet, always precise. Kilo never barked, never needed treats or toys. He watched, he moved, he executed. There was no wasted energy, no ego, only mission. And in that silent rhythm a bond grew, one that didn't need voice or command. It wasn't built on reward or routine affection. It was built on shared damage, shared restraint. 2 beings molded by systems that broke them, discarded them, then accidentally let them find each other. The others in the unit started calling Kilo the Ghost. Silent, efficient, relentless. But Brent knew better. Kilo wasn't a ghost. He was a soldier, and soldiers don't run. Not when the fire comes, not when escape is easier, not when someone they trust is bleeding beside them. Now, as flames clawed the cabin walls, and Brent lay broken beneath debris and smoke, Kilo remained, just like always, still beside him, still refusing to leave. The fire was alive. It howled like a wild animal, consuming everything in its path, the pines, the dirt, the bones of the forest. It surged through the valley with terrifying speed, embers skipping across treetops like sparks off gunpowder. Flames licked at the outer walls of the old cabin, blackening the timber, hissing against the glass. Inside, the air had turned thick and dark. Smoke curled in the rafters, settling like a suffocating blanket. The wooden beams groaned above Brent's unconscious body, and with each passing second the temperature climbed, but still Kilo did not move. He lay over Brent's chest, his scarred side pressed against the floorboards that were now warm. His lungs heaved, drawing in smoke he did not understand but instinctively feared. His eyes watered, and his paws twitched. Pain throbbed in his ribs. His front leg, once damaged in a mission months earlier, now trembled under the weight of his body. He could have run. The back window had cracked in the heat. A gap in the wall now offered a sliver of escape. One good sprint and he could be outside, free of the suffocating air, away from the inferno that was closing in around them. But he stayed. And then he rose, unsteady, shaking. He nudged Brent's face, whining softly. Nothing. No movement. He licked the man's cheek once, then again. Still no response. Decision, the hardest kind, the kind that no one trained him for. No handler, no program, no protocol. Kilo turned, limped toward the broken window, and looked out. Smoke blanketed the hills. Flames cut the ridge like knives of light. But just beyond the rise, far, almost impossible to see, a blinking red light cut faintly through the haze. A signal tower. Kilo looked back once. Brent lay motionless, one hand stretched toward the corner of the room, as if reaching for something he could not hold. Kilo let out a low, aching growl, then turned. He picked up the small tactical pouch Brent always kept clipped to his belt, a pouch that held a spare GPS locator designed for short-range tracking. The dog clenched it between his jaws and, without hesitation, leapt through the cracked window, landing hard on the wet ground outside. The heat hit him instantly. His fur steamed from the sweat already soaked into his body. He limped forward, weaving through flaming branches, ducking under falling ash. Every step was pain. Every breath was fire. But he ran through a wall of smoke, through a fire line meant to erase everything behind it. 1 mile, then 2. His pads bled, his legs buckled, but the blinking light in the distance kept calling him forward. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered the word, find. He had been trained for that once, and now he was doing it again, but not for a suspect, for a life. Just before dawn, a forestry fire drone scanning the burn zone picked up a faint, moving signal. A locator beacon, inconsistent and fading, but real. A rescue unit, rerouted. They found him at the edge of a charred creek bed. Kilo collapsed, the pouch still in his mouth. His body was scorched, fur singed, one eye swollen shut. But the light on the GPS was blinking, still on, still active. The rescuers stared in silence, one of them whispering, "Is that a dog?" They followed the signal's coordinates back up the ridge, retracing the trail Kilo had carved with blood and ash. And there, in the smoldering skeleton of a cabin, they found Brent, alive, barely breathing, dehydrated, burned, but alive. His first words, after oxygen touched his lungs, were rasped through cracked lips. "Kilo?" The medic nodded. "You'll see him soon." And Brent, through pain, through fire, through everything, smiled. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and quiet. Machines beeped rhythmically beside Brant's bed, soft green lines crawling across the monitors. His left leg was wrapped in layers of gauze. The skin on his arms and neck bore the early stages of burn recovery, red, raw, but treatable. The doctors called him lucky. Brent didn't feel lucky. Not until the door opened, and he heard the gentle thump of paws on linoleum. Kilo entered slowly, wearing a padded harness with a medical emblem stitched into the side. A white bandage ran across his left flank, and half of one ear was now missing. His coat, had been trimmed away in patches to treat burns and cuts, and one of his hind legs was braced to help with walking. But he walked, and when his eyes met Brent's, one still cloudy from the smoke, they were steady. Brent sat up straighter, tears stinging his eyes. He held out one bandaged hand. "Hey, partner." Kilo let out a soft whine, then stepped forward and rested his head gently in Brent's lap. No command, no need, just relief, and presence, and a kind of love that had nothing to do with training. In the days that followed, the story spread. DEA dog leads rescuers through fire to save handler. German shepherd crawls through blaze with GPS in jaw. The dog that didn't run. News crews lined the sidewalk outside the VA medical center. Firefighters came to shake Brent's hand. Former canine officers sent letters, care packages, and photos of their own dogs. Some retired, some long past. All remembered. One afternoon, the Secretary of Public Safety arrived in person in a small ceremony held in the hospital's garden courtyard. Brent and Kilo sat side by side beneath an American flag at half-mast. Brent wore a clean shirt for the first time in a week. Kilo, still stiff from treatment, wore a new padded vest with a patch on the side that read, "Line Guardian, active to the end." The official stepped forward and held out a velvet box. Inside, a silver medallion with a flame etched into the center, and the words, "For Valor Above Fire." He looked at Brent. "This is the first time we've awarded this to a K9, but when a dog does what even trained men hesitate to do, well, sir, that's not instinct, that's character." Brent, voice steady despite the lump in his throat, replied, "He didn't run. No one told him to stay, but he did. He made a decision no one trained him for. He chose me over his own life." The crowd stood silent, and Kilo, resting at Brent's feet, let out a small sigh and closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but peace. He had done what needed to be done, and now, maybe for the first time, he could rest without keeping watch. Months passed. The fires were long gone, leaving behind blackened stumps and silence. But in one small corner of New Mexico, something new had taken root, not in ash, but in gratitude. At the edge of a quiet town, just off the main road, stood a modest wooden sign, "Kilo's Choice, K9 Rescue and Rehabilitation Center." Established by Brent Delaney, it welcomed injured and retired working dogs, those who had served and been forgotten, just like Kilo once was. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe, and every dog that walked through its gate received a second chance. Not as tools, not as equipment, but as souls. Kilo's story spread across America. Veterans sent in patches from their units. Firefighters came to volunteer. Families brought their kids to meet the dog who ran through fire. The name Kilo became more than a call sign. It became a symbol. One spring morning, under a sky untouched by smoke, a crowd gathered at Arlington National Cemetery for a ceremony held rarely, and only for the rarest kind of courage. Brent, now walking with a cane, stood in his formal uniform. At his side, Kilo, older, still limping, but proud, wore his medal beneath a clean harness. The sun glinted off the silver as they stepped forward. When Brent took the microphone, the crowd fell silent. His voice was low but unwavering. Some fires burn everything in their path, but some light the way home. He was burned in the fire, but I was the one saved by it. The silence that followed was more powerful than applause. Later that evening, Brent sat on the front porch of the rescue center, a warm coffee in hand. The air was cool, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. Kilo lay beside his chair, head resting on Brent's boot, one ear twitching at the sound of distant birdsong. No alarms, no flames, no war, just peace. And between them, no words were needed, because some choices echo louder than commands, and some dogs guard more than doors. They guard what we almost lose and never let it go. Thank you for joining us for this unforgettable journey, one of fire, loyalty, and the silent bravery that only a dog like Kilo could show. In a world that often moves too fast to notice quiet heroes, this story reminds us that true courage does not always bark the loudest. Sometimes it simply stays when everyone else would run. Sometimes it lies beside you in the fire. If Kilo's story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe again in second chances and the bond between a person and their dog, we invite you to become part of our growing community. Subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories to hear more powerful, true stories of rescue, resilience, and the four-legged companions who change lives forever. Because here at Amazing Paws Stories, we believe the most extraordinary heroes often walk on four legs and never leave our side. We'll see you in the next story.
Two puppies and their mother. Freeze in the snow. What the man did next will make you cry. She stood there, frozen in the storm, not barking, not begging, just waiting, with two tiny lives pressed against her ribs. Why would anyone abandon a golden retriever in the dead of winter? And what did the man inside the cabin see in her eyes that made him risk everything to open that door? What happened next will make you believe in second chances again. The snow had begun to fall before dusk in Hollow Pines, Colorado, a quiet mountain town where winter came early and overstayed its welcome. By midnight, the storm had deepened into a full blizzard, the kind that devoured roads, silenced forests, and buried memories in white. Wind howled through the pines like a mournful choir, and flakes swirled in tight spirals before crashing against rooftops and windows like tiny ghosts. In the woods beyond town, nestled deep between two frozen hills, stood a small log cabin lit only by the flickering glow of a wood-burning stove. The cabin belonged to Samuel Brooks, a man in his late 60s whose solitude was worn like an old coat. Familiar, patched in grief, but warm in its own broken way. Samuel had once been a high school literature teacher, the kind whose voice was soft but steady, who still wrote with a fountain pen and believed poetry could mend things time couldn't. He was tall, but bent now, with a lean frame that used to run marathons and now only walked trails near his home. His gray hair had thinned at the crown, and his beard, once dark and full, was a trimmed silver. His blue eyes, hidden behind reading glasses, still carried kindness, though softened by loss. His wife Eleanor had passed 5 winters ago. Their only son, Jonah, had died before her, in a car accident that turned their lives inside out. Since then, Samuel had drifted into the rhythm of silence, chopping wood, tending to a small greenhouse, and writing letters he never sent. He sat now in his worn armchair, a thick knit blanket across his lap, and a mug of chamomile tea growing cold on the side table. On the desk near the window, a half-written letter rested under the warm halo of a desk lamp. It was addressed to Rachel, his niece, a woman in her early 30s, a clinical psychologist in Denver. Tall, always serious, and sharp-minded, Rachel had once adored her uncle. But grief had carved rifts through the family. A disagreement at Eleanor's funeral, sharp words and silence after, had left years of distance between them. Samuel still wrote to her, often. He just never mailed the letters. Outside, the wind screamed again. Samuel looked up from the page, his brow furrowing. He thought he'd heard something, a faint scratching. He set his pen down, held his breath. Nothing. Then faintly again, scratch, scratch, a muffled whimper. He stood slowly, joints aching as he moved to the door. The porch light had long been buried under snow, but the cabin's warm light bled softly through the fogged glass. He unlocked the door and cracked it open. The wind surged in, sharp and bitter. And there, just beyond the threshold, was a sight that stilled his heart. A golden retriever, soaked in snow, her golden coat dulled and matted by ice, stood hunched low. Her ribs showed, faint outlines beneath her fur, and her breath came out in short, hot clouds. Pressed against her belly, buried deep in the snow, were two puppies, no older than a few weeks, one darker golden, the other pale and shivering, their eyes barely open. The mother's eyes lifted to meet his. They were amber, wide, and pleading, not in panic, but in quiet, exhausted desperation. Samuel froze, his hand still on the doorknob. The logical voice inside him murmured caution. Stray animals, illness, trouble. But that voice was drowned by something deeper, older. An echo of Eleanor's whisper, or maybe Jonah's laughter in the back seat years ago when they'd brought home their first family dog. This was not just a dog. This was a mother, standing between death and her children. "Good Lord," Samuel muttered. "What happened to you?" He pushed the door open wider and stepped aside. The mother didn't move at first. She stood perfectly still, then looked down at her pups and whimpered once. Slowly, cautiously, she took one step forward. The smaller of the pups stumbled, nearly falling into a snowbank. The mother turned, gently took the pup by the scruff of the neck and carried it across the threshold. The second followed awkwardly on its own. Samuel shut the door quickly, sealing out the wind. The cabin warmed again. He stood in silence, watching the three of them, wet, cold, unsure, huddled near the fireplace. He moved slowly, fetched an old wool blanket, and laid it near the hearth. The mother flinched, but didn't move away. When he returned with a bowl of water, she eyed him cautiously, but eventually lowered her head to drink. "You can stay here tonight," he said softly. "All of you." The storm roared outside. Inside the fire crackled, and the pups curled into their mother's side. Samuel sat back down and picked up his pen. His eyes lingered on the letter to Rachel. He scratched out the closing sentence and added a new one. "I had unexpected visitors tonight. A mother, 2 little ones. I think they needed someone to open the door." The fire burned low in the hearth by morning, its heat reduced to glowing embers and soft crackles. Outside, hollow pines remained buried under a thick layer of snow, the storm having passed some time before dawn, leaving behind a heavy stillness that blanketed the town like a held breath. Pale light seeped through the cabin windows, and inside the quiet was broken only by the occasional sigh of wind and the soft rustle of movement on the floor near the fireplace. Samuel awoke in his chair, his neck stiff and knees sore from a night spent hunched awkwardly. He rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand and blinked toward the hearth. The mother golden retriever lay curled around her pups, her body tense even in sleep, as though prepared to flee at the slightest threat. Her fur, once wet and matted, had dried into dull clumps, revealing the fine bones beneath her golden coat. She opened her eyes when he shifted in his seat, amber and watchful, always watchful. Samuel moved slowly, careful not to startle her. He poured warm water into a clean bowl and slid it toward her across the floor, stopping a few feet away. Then he retreated and sat down, giving her space. She sniffed the air eyes flicking between the water and Samuel. After a long pause, she rose on trembling legs and padded to the bowl, drinking greedily, her entire body quivering from the effort. The puppies, one a rich honey gold and the other nearly white, began to stir, emitting tiny yips that were more breath than bark. Their eyes remained barely open, their limbs too weak to stand for more than a few seconds. The mother turned and nudged them toward her belly, encouraging them to nurse. She curled her body protectively around them, nose hovering just above their backs. "You're a good girl," Samuel murmured from his chair. "Brave." He didn't expect a reaction, and none came. She was still unsure of him, still teetering between trust and fear. But she hadn't growled. That was something. He left them for a moment, stepping into the kitchen to prepare food. He found an old can of tuna, mashed it with rice, and warmed the mixture on the stove. When he returned, he placed the bowl a little closer to her than before. She hesitated, then crept forward to eat, one eye on him the entire time. As she ate, Samuel studied her. She had no collar. Her coat had once been beautiful, long-feathered and rich with golden tones. Now it hung in rough mats and patches, signs of neglect and exposure. Her paws were raw, her left ear torn at the edge. The puppies were small, too small for the cold they had survived. He estimated they were no more than 3 weeks old, barely strong enough to suckle, and certainly not meant to be in a snowstorm. He turned toward his writing desk. The letter from the night before still sat open. He picked up his pen and added a few more lines. Her eyes were like someone who's lost everything, but refuses to let go of what little is left. She's still fighting Rachel. I don't know if it's for her or for them, but she's holding on. And for now, that's enough. He folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and for the first time in years addressed it properly. He added a stamp and set it near the door. Maybe this one, he thought, would finally make it to her hands. In Denver, over 100 miles away, Dr. Rachel Hammond sat in her modest office, staring out the frosted window that overlooked a narrow city alley. She was tall and slim, always dressed in dark colors, with a gray wool coat slung over the back of her chair. Her hair, once long and auburn, was now cut into a practical shoulder-length bob. 33 clinical and respected Rachel was known at the hospital for her calm efficiency. She never raised her voice, never snapped under pressure, and never cried at her desk. Her patients appreciated her stability. Her colleagues admired her distance. But today a letter lay unopened on her lap, its return address penned in Samuel's neat, slanted handwriting. It had arrived that morning unexpected after 5 years of silence. Her fingers hovered over the flap before tearing it gently open. The first line made her breath hitch. The second made her blink hard. By the time she reached the final paragraph, she was sitting perfectly still, a quiet ache blooming behind her ribs. She hadn't meant to cry, but there it was, just a single tear down her left cheek. He'd mentioned a dog, a mother, puppies, snow, and for the first time in her adult life, he'd signed the letter not with "take care" or "sincerely," but "come home when you can. You'd like them, I think." Rachel folded the letter with practiced care. She reached for her phone, thumbed through her calendar. Her schedule for January was tight, but there was 1 week after New Year's she hadn't booked yet. She clicked out of office and typed a message to her assistant. "I'll be traveling to Hollow Pines. Family matter." Back in the cabin, Samuel was learning the delicate rhythm of caring for a creature who didn't yet trust him. He laid towels near the fire, cleaned up the floor when the puppies had accidents, and gently brushed out a section of the mother's tangled fur with an old comb. She allowed it, barely flinching, only when he touched the torn edge of her ear. He hadn't named her yet. It felt too soon. Naming something meant keeping it. And maybe he thought she already had a name, one someone else had whispered long ago, before they abandoned her in the cold. But he spoke to her anyway in quiet tones, like he used to read bedtime stories aloud to Jonah. He told her about the town, about the way hollow pines got so silent during storms, it made the air feel holy. He told her about Eleanor, and the way she used to hum old jazz songs while stirring soup. And he told her about Rachel, whom he hadn't seen since Jonah's funeral, the last time the family had been whole, before grief made silence easier than love. That night, as the fire glowed and snow began to fall again, he lay a second blanket by the fire. The dog curled around her pups without protest. Samuel sat back down in his chair, hands wrapped around a fresh cup of tea, and whispered, "You can stay as long as you need." Outside, the night was quieter than before. Inside, there were 3 fragile souls and the quiet beginnings of trust. The days in Hollow Pines stretched slowly, wrapped in winter's hush and the soft crackling of firewood. The snow had stopped falling, but it clung stubbornly to every tree limb, roof, and field like a memory that wouldn't melt. Sunlight flickered weakly through the pine needles, its warmth barely brushing the ground. Inside Samuel's cabin, life had settled into a quiet rhythm. The mother dog, still unnamed, still silent, watched Samuel with cautious amber eyes. The 2 puppies, now a little stronger, nuzzled and whimpered as they crawled across the blanket laid near the hearth. Samuel had begun calling them by soft, unofficial names. The golden pup was Copper for his rich fur, and the lighter one Daisy for her pale, creamy coat and delicate features. They were clumsy bundles of warmth and noise, bringing a kind of mess to the cabin that had long been absent, a mess Samuel found he didn't mind. The mother, however, remained hesitant. She accepted his offerings of food and water. She tolerated his presence, but she did not come closer, not yet, until that morning. Samuel was crouched near the fire, coaxing the flames back to life. Behind him, the rustle of movement, then the soft tap of claws on wood floor. He turned his head slightly and saw her standing there closer than she had ever dared. Her ribs showed faintly through her golden coat, which still held patches of ice-damaged fur. But her eyes had changed, less, flinch more focus. A question lived there now. Not, "Will you hurt me?" but "Can I trust you?" Samuel didn't move. He let the silence speak. After a pause, she stepped forward once more, just enough to brush his sleeve with her nose before retreating. It was enough. Later, when she lay beside her puppies, Samuel fetched a soft bristled brush from a box of old pet supplies tucked in the pantry. He approached her slowly, kneeling a few feet away. She looked up but did not growl. Gently, slowly, he reached out, letting her sniff the handle first. Then, stroke by cautious stroke, he began brushing out the tangled mats along her shoulders. Her body tensed beneath his hand. She flinched when he reached her flank. That's when he saw them. Thin, pale scars crisscrossed her side, some faint and faded, others more recent. A jagged one curved along her hip, another beneath her belly. Not injuries from frostbite or wilderness. These had edges too straight, too deliberate. Samuel let the brush drop gently to the floor. "What did they do to you?" he whispered. She didn't respond, of course. She merely closed her eyes and curled tighter around her pups, as though shielding them even in her sleep. That same morning in Denver, Rachel Hammond stood in the lobby of the Summit Animal Aid Center, a modest volunteer-run shelter tucked beside an overpass bridge. She had arrived unannounced, clutching the printed email she'd received from her uncle, his first reply since she told him she was coming. Though he'd said little, his last line haunted her. "They're healing. Slowly. Like me, maybe." Behind the front desk stood Kelsey Nguyen, Rachel's closest friend since grad school. Kelsey was Vietnamese-American in her late 20s, with dark shoulder-length hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She wore a bright orange vest over her thermal jacket and had an ever-present streak of dog fur somewhere on her clothes. While Rachel was composed and logical, Kelsey was driven by instinct, heart first. "You just showed up without texting," Kelsey said, arching an eyebrow. "I thought you had patience until New Year's." "I cleared the schedule," Rachel replied, holding out her phone. "I need a favor." Kelsey skimmed the screen. A photo Samuel had sent, a low-resolution image of the golden retriever and two tiny pups huddled by the fire. The image was grainy but poignant. Kelsey's face softened. "She looks rough, real rough." "You think she was dumped?" Rachel nodded. "Uncle Sam said no collar and she's got injuries. Can you check the shelter databases? Lost pet boards? Maybe breeding reports? Anything that could match?" Kelsey led her into a back room where a row of computers blinked softly. Within minutes she was navigating through pet finder listings, municipal shelter records, and rescue center notes. Her fingers moved quickly, eyes scanning. She paused, then shook her head. "There are 3 golden retrievers listed as lost this month in Colorado. None have puppies. None match the scars or her size. One was found already." She clicked again. "Nothing in Hollow Pines area. Nothing in the private breeders' forums either." "So she's off the map," Rachel murmured, like she didn't exist. Kelsey glanced at her friend. "Some breeders don't register every litter, especially the backyard kind. If she couldn't produce any more, they probably just tossed her." Rachel swallowed hard. "What kind of person does that?" "The kind that shouldn't be around animals." Kelsey leaned back in her chair. "Keep me updated. If you bring her in for a checkup, we'll do it for free." Rachel hugged her. "Thanks, Kels. I think she might be the one helping him recover." Back in Hollow Pines, Samuel prepared a small meal, shredded chicken, soft rice broth, stirred until warm. When he brought it over, the mother dog stirred. She sniffed the bowl but did not touch it. Instead, she nudged the pups toward it first, watching intently as they nibbled. Even now, with food right there, her first instinct was to protect. He watched her closely. She still hadn't barked once. No growl, no whimper. Just those quiet, watchful movements. He had once read that dogs who were abused often went silent, not because they didn't feel, but because sound had brought them pain. "I want to call you something," he said aloud. "I don't know your real name, but you deserve one." He thought about Eleanor's garden, long gone now, beneath the snow. The way his wife used to say, "The moonlight makes everything gentler." He looked at the way the dog curled into the light near the fire, her golden fur glowing faintly. "Luna," he said softly, "would that be okay?" The dog flicked her ears. Then slowly she raised her eyes to meet his. It wasn't understanding, not quite, but something settled between them. He smiled. "Luna it is." The snow had softened under the weak midday sun, leaving a thin crust over the white expanse surrounding Samuel's cabin. It was the first day since the blizzard that the temperature had risen above freezing, and the icicles hanging from the cabin's eaves began to drip, filling the silence with a soft, steady rhythm. The world outside seemed calmer, gentler. For a moment it felt like winter was holding its breath. Inside, Luna stirred restlessly. She paced from the fireplace to the door and back again, her body tense, her gaze flicking toward the window. Her pups, now stronger and more curious, scrambled clumsily across the rug, nipping at one another's tails and bumping into the legs of Samuel's rocking chair. Samuel watched them with a small smile tugging at his lips. "I think she wants out," he said aloud, more to himself than to anyone else. "You've been staring at that door for hours, girl." Luna looked up, ears perked, then turned back to the door and let out a low whine. It was the first real vocalization he'd heard from her. Not a bark, not a growl, just a small, pleading sound. "All right," Samuel said, grabbing his coat from the hook, "but only for a bit. It's still cold enough to turn a smile into a frostbite." He bundled the pups in a blanket and stepped out onto the porch, with Luna following at his side. Her steps were cautious, her paws sinking slightly into the snow as she led the way down the path. Samuel set the pups down gently on a patch of cleared snow near the woodpile. Copper let out a surprised yip and flopped over. Daisy nuzzled into her brother's side tail, wagging slowly. Luna hovered protectively beside them, her body forming a gentle crescent. She sniffed the air, ears twitching at every sound. The groan of trees shifting under snow, the wind whispering through the pines, the distant call of a crow. Samuel stepped back, watching the little family. His breath curled in the air. There was something healing in the simplicity of it all, something that reminded him of taking Jonah sledding in this very yard decades ago when laughter echoed between trees and snowballs flew with reckless joy. And then Luna froze. Every muscle in her body locked into place. Her ears shot forward, her tail stiffened, and a low growl began to rise from her throat. Samuel turned quickly. At first he saw nothing, just the familiar stretch of pine trees lining the edge of the property. But then he followed Luna's gaze and spotted it. Footprints. Not paw prints. Boots. Large, deliberate, and fresh. They broke the thin crust of snow and trailed from the forest's edge to within 20 yards of the cabin. His heart began to hammer. He scanned the tree line again. No movement, no figure. But the tracks were clear. Someone had been watching. Luna, inside Samuel, said firmly, "Now!" She didn't move. Inside, he repeated his voice sharper this time. Reluctantly, she nudged her pups into the blanket, then turned and trotted up the steps. Samuel followed quickly, scooping up the pups and pushing the door shut behind them. He locked the bolt and drew the curtain tight across the window. Inside, the warmth felt thinner now, as if the shadow from the woods had followed them in. That night, while the pups slept curled in a tangle of legs and soft snores, Samuel sat at his desk and pulled out another sheet of stationery. His hands trembled slightly as he wrote the words darker than usual, pressing deeper into the paper. Someone was here today. A man, or at least their footprints say so, watching. I don't know why. I don't know what they want. But Luna knew. She felt it before I did. I've lived in these woods for 20 years, Rachel. This is the first time I've felt like I didn't belong on my own land. He signed it with only his name this time, no invitation, no closing, just Samuel. He stared at the page for a long time before folding it. He didn't know if he'd send it. In Denver, Rachel sat cross-legged on her apartment floor, scrolling through a labyrinth of forgotten web pages. She had been searching for hours, her laptop surrounded by notepads filled with scribbled names, dates, and links. Something had tugged at her ever since Kelsey mentioned unregistered breeders. The idea that Luna might have come from a place where dogs were only seen as machines for profit. She found it late in the dark space of the internet where forums went to die. A blog titled Golden Pines Breeder's Diary. The last post dated back 3 years. She clicked. There were photos, breeding schedules, litter updates, and beneath one post a picture. The lighting was poor, the resolution blurry. But Rachel's heart skipped. It was her. Luna standing behind a chain-link fence. Her fur looked fuller then, but her eyes were unmistakable amber and alert. The caption beneath read, "Sunny, retired after final litter." Rachel whispered, "Sunny." That was her name. She scrolled further, reading through cold clinical notes about pregnancies, cell prices, birth defects. The language was detached, inhumane. There was no mention of what happened to Sunny afterward. The blog abruptly stopped. No explanation. Just silence. Rachel sat back, heart heavy. She now knew where Luna had come from. What she didn't know yet was why someone had been near Samuel's cabin, and whether they meant to return. It was nearly dusk when the knock came. Samuel had just finished chopping a bundle of kindling outside the shed, his breath rising in short clouds as the wind picked up again. The shadows were long now, stretching across the snow like black fingers. Luna had refused to leave the porch that afternoon, her gaze fixed on the same tree line where the footprints had appeared days before. Something in her had changed, more alert, more guarded. The pups were inside napping beneath the old wool blanket near the fire. Samuel, hands stiff and raw from the cold, stepped up the porch stairs with a grunt. The wind howled low, curling around the cabin like a whisper. And then 3 sharp knocks, not timid, not panicked, intentional. He froze. Not many people visited Hollow Pines without warning. The nearest neighbor lived 2 miles up the ridge. Mail didn't come by truck, only snowshoe. He opened the door a few inches, leaving the chain lock engaged. Standing just beyond the threshold was a man in his 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with a greasy black coat and jeans stiff with snow. His eyes were small and set deep beneath a furrowed brow, and his smile didn't reach them. He wore a beat-up camo cap and held nothing in his hands. But something about the way he leaned forward made Samuel tighten his grip on the door. "Evening," the man said. His voice was smooth but edged with something sour. "Name's Mick Delaney. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Samuel stared. "I don't know you. You've got a dog in there. Golden. Female." Answering to Sunny, his eyes narrowed. "She's mine." Behind Samuel, a low growl started to rise. Luna had come to the door, body tense, tail lowered but ready. Her hackles bristled as she stepped between Samuel and the stranger, her lips peeled back slightly, not in rage but recognition. Samuel didn't flinch. "Her name is Luna now. She showed up half dead in a snowstorm. No collar." "No chip, no nothing." Mick shrugged. "She slipped out. Happens, but I'm here to take her back." Samuel shook his head, stepping out onto the porch, shutting the door behind him just enough to keep Luna inside. "If you cared for her, she wouldn't be covered in scars and starving. She wouldn't be dragging newborn pups through a blizzard." Mick chuckled, shifting his weight. "Dogs are property, mister. I don't need to explain myself." "Then explain this," Samuel said coldly, pointing to the side of the porch where the man's boot prints matched the ones from days earlier. "You've been watching, lurking. That's not how people reclaim property. The man's face darkened. Look, old man, you don't want trouble. She's mine, and I've got the paperwork to prove it. You don't have anything Samuel said, and you'll get off my land before I make that very clear. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Mick's smile returned, but it was thinner now, a veil barely hiding contempt. You've made a mistake. You don't know what that dog's capable of. She's trouble. No, Samuel said, stepping closer. She's survived trouble, and she's not going anywhere. Mick's eyes lingered on the cabin behind Samuel. Then, without another word, he turned and walked off into the trees. Samuel stood on the porch long after the sound of boots crunching snow had faded. The door creaked behind him, and he turned to find Luna watching her body pressed against the threshold, eyes wide with something he hadn't seen in her before. Fear, yes, but also defiance. "You did good, girl," he whispered, "but I don't think he's done." 3 hours later, headlights cut through the dark curve of a mountain road. Rachel had been driving for nearly 6 hours. Her fingers were stiff from gripping the wheel, her eyes heavy from focusing on icy curves and narrow shoulders. She hadn't planned to leave Denver until next week, but the moment she read Samuel's last letter mentioning footprints and Luna's reaction, she threw her things in the car and left. The folder beside her held copies of state statutes on animal abandonment, adoption laws, and documentation protocols. She wasn't a lawyer, but she knew how to prepare. Years of working in trauma clinics had taught her that most of life's battles came down to what people believed and what they could prove. She parked outside the cabin engine, idling the front porch light, casting long shadows across the drive. Samuel stepped out bundled in his heavy flannel jacket, his breath visible in the cold. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rachel got out of the car and crossed the snow with slow, deliberate steps. He opened his arms awkwardly at first. She walked into them. "Uncle Sam," she murmured, "you look older." He smiled sadly. "You look ready for war." She nodded at the file. "Just in case." Later that night, over tea and the occasional yawn from the fireplace, Rachel sat cross-legged on the living room rug. Luna lay nearby, her head resting on one paw, eyes fixed on the newcomer. "She remembers him," Samuel said. "The way she growled. It wasn't fear, it was recognition." Rachel thumbed through her notes. "If he tries anything again, we report it. No tag, no license, no chip. He has no legal right." "But he'll come back," Samuel said. "I'll be here," Rachel replied. "And she won't be alone." Morning broke gently over hollow pines, casting golden rays across the snow-covered landscape. The light filtered through frost-laced windows and landed in quiet pools on the hardwood floor of Samuel's cabin. Inside, the world stirred slowly. The fire had long since burned to coals, but warmth still lingered in the air, less from the stove and more from the presence of something returned, something rediscovered. Rachel stood at the kitchen counter, her dark hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, wearing one of her uncle's flannel shirts over thermal leggings. Her eyes were tired, but alert as she stirred oatmeal on the stovetop. She hadn't slept well, not from discomfort, but from the sheer weight of the past 2 days. Seeing Samuel again, hearing about the man who'd come to claim Luna, and witnessing the quiet resilience of the dog herself, had awoken something both protective and unresolved in her. Near the fireplace, Luna lay curled around her 2 puppies. Copper and Daisy were livelier now, their movements more coordinated, their barks growing in clarity. Copper had developed a fascination with Rachel's shoelaces, while Daisy preferred curling under the table legs or nestling between Samuel's feet whenever he read. Samuel emerged from the hallway with slow, careful steps. He wore a faded gray sweater that hung a bit too loose on his frame and thick wool socks over his slippers. His beard had gone untrimmed for a few days, giving him a slightly more rugged look than usual. "She let me touch her last night," he said quietly, as if speaking it too loud would undo it. "For the first time." Rachel turned, startled. "Really?" "Not just sniff and walk away." He shook his head. "I was sitting right over there near the window. She came over. Didn't press into my hand, didn't wag her tail, just stood there and let me lay a hand on her head. That's all." But she didn't flinch. Rachel smiled gently. "That's trust, or the beginning of it." Samuel nodded, his gaze drifting back to Luna. She was watching them both now, her head resting between her paws, amber eyes calm but cautious. Rachel took a deep breath and crossed to the small wooden table near the front window. "I didn't tell you," she said, pouring tea into a mug, "but on my way here I got caught in the snowstorm that hit the foothills Sunday night." Samuel looked over. "You okay?" "Yeah. Just shaken. I had to pull off at a roadside lodge, little place called Whisper Pines Inn. Barely 2 rooms and an old lady running the desk named Nora. She gave me a cup of stew and made me promise to call someone before I slept. She sounds like someone from a better decade." Rachel laughed softly. "She reminded me of Grandma. Anyway, I used the front desk landline. Cell service was gone to call you. It was the first time I'd heard your voice in 5 years. Samuel looked down, his fingers curling around his mug. "I remember. I didn't say much. You didn't have to. Just hearing you pick up, I knew things weren't broken beyond repair." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the wind tugged gently at the trees. Inside, something had shifted, like 2 clocks finally ticking in sync again. That afternoon, while Rachel reviewed her legal documents at the dining table, Samuel went outside to collect firewood. The pups now able to wobble after each other without tipping over chased Copper's tail in lazy circles near the fire. Luna sat up slowly and crossed the room. Rachel noticed her presence first by the sudden quiet. She turned and found Luna, standing just a few feet away, eyes focused not on the pups, but on her. Rachel set the papers down and slowly lowered herself to the floor, hands open on her lap. She didn't move further, didn't call Luna by name. She simply waited. Luna took a tentative step forward, then another. Her nose twitched, catching Rachel's scent again, but this time without the same guarded edge. She paused beside her body, still angled sideways. Rachel whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart." Then Luna lowered her head just enough for her muzzle to brush against Rachel's open hand. Rachel didn't breathe. She let her fingers curl lightly under Luna's chin, then slowly ran them over the top of her head, down her soft, scarred neck. Luna stayed. From the doorway, Samuel watched. His chest tightened, not with sadness, but awe. A quiet, steady healing had begun, one he could neither force nor rush, but only hold space for. Later that evening, with the pups asleep and Rachel reading near the hearth, Samuel brought in a small crate of fresh logs. The cabin glowed with a soft amber light, and for the first time in years, laughter had echoed earlier when Copper had mistaken a slipper for prey and launched an uncoordinated attack that ended in a comical tumble. Rachel closed her book. "We should think about registering her soon. A vet visit, maybe get her chipped under your name." Samuel nodded. "You think Mick will come back?" "I think he might, but we'll be ready." He glanced at Luna, now curled beside the fire, her pups nestled into her side. "She's not going anywhere," he said. "She's family now." The snow began falling again that evening, quiet, steady, unannounced. By nightfall, Hollow Pines had returned to its familiar winter hush, and the wind slipped through the pine trees like an old song. The glow from Samuel's cabin spread faintly through the woods, flickering from the windows and warming the snow-covered clearing like a lighthouse in a sea of white. Inside, Rachel sat by the fire with a mug of cinnamon tea, her fingers curled around the warmth. Samuel was on the porch stacking another armful of firewood, his silhouette outlined through the frosted window panes. Luna lay close to her pups near the hearth, her body now visibly stronger, her coat regaining its golden sheen, her movements more confident. Daisy and Copper tumbled and yipped in a heap of paws and playful growls, their tails wagging like soft brushes on the wooden floor. Rachel's eyes drifted toward the front door, the snow piling just beyond the threshold. Something about the stillness of the night felt too perfect, like a breath being held. She stood slowly, stepping toward the window. That's when Luna rose, her ears shot up. Her body tensed, and a deep, guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards. She lunged toward the door, barking sharply, one bark, then another, sharper this time. Not play, not warning. Alarm. Rachel's pulse quickened. Uncle Sam. From outside, a voice rose from the shadows. "You think a piece of paper changes what's mine?" Samuel pushed the door open and stepped out into the porch light, a rifle slung over one shoulder, his breath visible in the icy air. Standing just inside the tree line was Mick Delaney, his camo jacket dusted in snow, hands in his pockets, face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "I told you to stay off my land," Samuel said evenly. "You don't get to decide that," Mick snarled. "Sonny's mine. You think changing her name makes her yours?" Samuel's grip on the rifle tightened. "She's not a thing, Mick. She's not a shovel or a wrench or a truck. She's a living being. You left her to die. I raised her, trained her, fed her for years." "You think that don't count?" "No," Samuel said. "Not when you threw her away." Behind Samuel, Rachel stepped out onto the porch, her phone in one hand, her breath shallow. "Sheriff's 5 minutes away," she said, her voice louder than she expected. Mick spat into the snow. "I ain't scared of a badge. Cops don't know the law better than I do." "I brought the law with me," she replied. "And I've got records, photos, expert statements, and enough evidence to bury your claim." Mick stepped forward. That's when Luna appeared, bursting through the doorway, fur-bristled teeth bared, standing tall between Samuel and Mick. She didn't bark this time. She didn't growl. She stared. Mick froze. The recognition in her eyes was unmistakable, and something in his demeanor changed. Not remorse, fear. The kind of fear that knows when a story is ending. Headlights swept across the trees as a patrol vehicle pulled into the clearing, tires crunching over snow. The truck door opened and Sheriff Janice Morrell stepped out. She was in her early 50s, broad-shouldered with streaks of gray in her tightly braided hair. Her uniform looked worn from years of use, but her presence carried the calm of someone who'd handled everything from drunk hunters to blizzards that swallowed highways. She scanned the scene quickly. "Evening," she said. "Everyone, keep their hands where I can see them. Mick Delaney." Rachel said, stepping down from the porch. "He's trespassing. Got a call from dispatch," Janice replied. "Didn't expect to find an armed party." Samuel lowered the rifle slowly. "Didn't plan on needing it." Janice turned to Mick. "You got proof of ownership, collar microchip vet records?" Mick bristled. "She was mine. She ran off." "Dog's been here for over a week," Janice said, pulling a small notebook from her jacket. "No report of her missing. No local vet ever registered her under your name. And from what I hear, you've got a reputation for dropping dogs off once they're past breeding. I got rights." Janice shook her head. "You had rights. Now this dog's considered abandoned under state statute. Rescue status applies. Unless you've got a notarized contract or a live witness to prove otherwise, I suggest you leave." Mick stared at Luna one last time. She stood unmoving, not retreating, not cowering. She had remembered him, but she no longer feared him. He turned, muttered something under his breath, and disappeared into the trees. Janice turned back to Samuel. "You all right?" He exhaled for what felt like the first time all night. "I am now." Later, once the cabin had calmed and the fire was burning high again, Rachel sat in the corner armchair, staring into the flickering light. Her heart was still pounding, but her hands were steady. Luna rested against Samuel's leg on the rug, her pups curled beneath her chest like tiny golden suns. "I passed by Mom's childhood home on the way here," Rachel said suddenly. Samuel looked up. "You did. It's still standing. White porch, green shutters. Same old pine tree in the front yard. Smaller than I remembered. It always is." Rachel smiled faintly. "I thought I'd just look. Say hello to a memory. But I didn't feel like leaving. Not right away." Samuel nodded slowly. "You don't have to rush back." "I think I won't," she said. "Not yet." The fire crackled. Luna let out a soft, content sigh. Snow fell outside silently. The snow had melted into soft patches by mid-February, and hollow pines shimmered with the shy gold of early sunrises. The sky no longer held its oppressive gray, and the scent of thawing pine needles mingled with the crisp mountain air. The wind, once howling and cruel, now moved with gentler purpose, rustling the branches like fingers turning the page of a new season. Samuel stood on the porch, one hand resting on the wooden railing that he had resanded just last week. His other hand held a coffee mug, steam rising lazily from its surface. The view in front of him had changed, not the trees, not the mountains, but the life that now filled the space around him. Luna stretched out on the front steps, her coat gleaming in the sunlight. She looked years younger now, though her scars remained. Copper and Daisy tumbled over one another nearby, tripping over their oversized paws, occasionally pausing to bark at wind-blown leaves like they were enemies in a grand adventure. Every now and then Luna would lift her head to check on them, her eyes soft but alert. Behind him, laughter drifted from the kitchen. Rachel stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, her sleeves rolled up, hair tucked beneath a knit beanie. She moved with ease now, like the cabin was becoming hers too, one drawer at a time. The sound of utensils clinking, butter sizzling, and the radio playing something mellow completed the transformation of Samuel's once quiet refuge into something far more vibrant. Samuel turned, just as Rachel came out with 2 plates in hand. "You keep spoiling me," he said. Rachel shrugged with a grin. "It's payment for room and board. Plus, I figure this old place runs on more than firewood now." They sat together at the porch table. For a while neither spoke, both watching the dogs romp in the melting snow. Then Rachel reached into the folder beside her and placed a few official-looking documents on the table. "I spoke with the Hollow Pines shelter yesterday," she said. "They've finalized it. Luna, Copper, and Daisy are officially yours. Or ours, if that's okay with you." Samuel ran a calloused finger over the bolded words. "Ownership transfer. Companion animals." "I never thought I'd be a dog owner again," he said softly. "Never thought I'd want to be." "You didn't choose her," Rachel said, watching Luna nudge Daisy away from a stick she was chewing. "She chose you." He smiled. "That she did." That afternoon, they drove into town together, Samuel behind the wheel of his old rust-colored pickup, Rachel beside him with the pups nestled in a crate between them. Luna rode in the bed of the truck tail, swishing as the wind ruffled her ears. They stopped by the local vet's office for follow-ups and vaccinations, where Dr. Emery Clark, a wiry woman in her late 60s with silver hair and the sharpness of a hawk, examined the three dogs with a mix of precision and affection. "She's healing beautifully," Dr. Clark said, running a hand down Luna's back. "Still a bit underweight, but no infection, no fever. And those pups, fighters, both of them." Rachel handed over the adoption paperwork. Dr. Clark adjusted her glasses and smiled. "Well then, welcome to the family officially." They picked up a few supplies from the general store, new collars, engraved name tags, and even a dog bed Samuel pretended not to be excited about. The store clerk, a lanky teenager named Troy with a mop of curly brown hair, gave Daisy a scratch behind the ears and whispered, "You're gonna love it here, girl," like he was delivering a sacred promise. As they drove back to the cabin, the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting the world in hues of honey and shadow. The road curved gently, tracing familiar paths, but everything felt different, warmer, more permanent. That evening, while Samuel cleaned the dishes and the pups slept curled like commas near the fire, Rachel sat at the dining table with her laptop. She had opened a new file, its header blinking in bold Hollow Pines Retreat, Proposal. She turned toward Samuel. "What would you say," she began, "if we made this place into more than just a home?" He raised an eyebrow. "I mean, we've seen what it did for Luna, for you, for me even. What if there were more like her? Like us, people or animals broken, scared, forgotten, looking for somewhere quiet to heal." Samuel dried his hands and leaned against the counter thoughtful. "You want to turn the cabin into a rescue?" "No," she said. "A retreat, a sanctuary, not just for dogs, for veterans, for abuse survivors, for anyone carrying something too heavy. We could build cabins along the edge of the forest, partner with rescue organizations, bring in therapists, animal bonding programs." Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "Call it what you want," he said, "so long as the coffee stays strong and the dogs stay free." Rachel smiled, her eyes glinting. "Deal." Days passed, and the rhythm of life at the cabin grew steady, the sound of nails clicking across hardwood floors, the occasional yelp of a pup discovering stairs. Samuel's voice humming old tunes as he chopped wood, Rachel tapping her keyboard late into the night vision blooming with plans. One morning Samuel walked past the large window and paused. Light filtered through in a golden wash, and across the floor danced shadows of wagging tails and flopping ears. He stood still, letting it sink in. For the first time in many years, the house was no longer a place of echoes. It was a place of voices, of joy, of family. In a quiet cabin tucked deep within the snowy woods, three fragile souls, Luna and her two pups, found something most people spend a lifetime searching for a second chance. But the miracle wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come with thunder or signs in the sky. It came gently in the form of a kind hand, a warm place to rest, and the steady presence of someone who didn't turn away. This story reminds us that God's grace often arrives not through grand gestures, but in the small acts of compassion we choose every day. Luna was rescued, but in her quiet courage, she rescued Samuel, restored a broken family, and inspired a future where healing has a home. Through Luna's journey, we are reminded that healing is possible. Love is stronger than fear, and no creature is ever too far gone to be saved. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to open the door and say, "You're safe now." In our everyday lives, there are Lunas all around us. Wounded hearts, abandoned animals, forgotten souls. Perhaps you are someone's Samuel. Perhaps you are someone's miracle in waiting. And maybe, just maybe, God has sent you a Luna to remind you that you still have purpose and that your heart still has room to grow. If this story touched you, please share it, leave a comment, subscribe to our channel, and join us in praying for those still waiting for rescue. Comment, Amen, if you believe every life, no matter how broken, is worthy of love and redemption.